Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the first in a series of webinars we at EduGeek have set up to run over the next week, which we hope you'll all find very helpful and informative. And kicking these off, we are very pleased to have Al Kingsley from NetSupport here, who we have known and worked with for many years. For those of you who've never come across Al, it can't be many, he's possibly one of the busiest people working in the EdTech sector today. As not only is he the Managing Director of NetSupport, he is also the Chair of a multi-academy trust, school governor, and also finds time to write books. He's the author of My School Government's Handbook, Keeping It Simple, a step-by-step guide and checklist for all school governors, and My Secret EdTech Diary, looking at educational technology through a wider lens. Both of these are available on Amazon and Kindle and paperback versions if you want to take a look at those later. Today, Al will be taking us through his session on shaping and implementing digital strategy, which will provide you with some very valuable information on how to get the most out of your school IT estate. There will be an opportunity for a question and answer session at the end of Al's talk, and if any of you want to ask a question, then please feel free to use the chat box and we shall get through as many as we can. Welcome, Al. It's great to have you here today, and I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you, Chris.
Maybe something a bit of lag.
I have to say, a couple of seconds ago, yeah, there seems to be a bit of a connection delay, so I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, you're coming through fine now, Al.
Hallelujah to that. So just literally before we came online, I lost my connection altogether. So I've jumped back in and don't know what. Can you hear me okay, Chris?
Yep, there we go, Al. Yeah, you're still a little juddery. I think we're having it'll be all right on the night moment.
Well,
there we go.
What better when we're talking about EdTech to have a problem? So fingers crossed, we're okay for our session. Listen, thank you for inviting me to come and have a chat. Hopefully you can pop up my my screen that I'm sharing with you with a bit of a slide deck, and we're going to have a little dip into digital, but taking that strategy forwards and looking at ways that we can actually measure impact. And I'll keep an eye on the chat link to see whether I disappear at any point. So anyway, welcome folks, and thank you to Chris and Sean for the chance to have a chat and share with you. And in the spirit of technology, let's keep fingers and toes crossed that we don't lose any connectivity through this. So yes, I've been introduced. We've been involved in EduGeek for years. I'm certainly a lot less grayer and wrinkly than when we first joined EduGeek, but I have a number of roles in the EdTech space, not least being the CEO of NetSupport, but I also have a number of other roles and just wanted to share a few with you. So I'm chair of a multi-academy trust, been involved in academies and local authority schools and governance for the best part of 2 decades now. I sit on the combined authority for our region, chair the Employment and Skills Board. I'm an apprenticeship ambassador. I sit on the Regional Schools Directors Board for the East of England, supporting academies across the region, as well as chairing an alternative provision academy. So when I talk about education, I do very much try and be a fusion between those two halves. The one half of spending much of my time involved in supporting learning for all age groups, and the other half that technology can have a positive impact in supporting that journey. Hopefully to cover today. I'm really mindful. I talk to all sorts of educators around the world, and today I've got a lot of very technical people on, so I'm really conscious that not everything I cover will be necessarily news to you, but bear with me because I'm trying to connect the dots between the technology and actually the key bit, which is how we get the most out of it. Chris also very kindly mentioned my couple of books there. At the very least, they're good for a bit of colouring, but I've tried both on the use of EdTech and the role of governance to really take it plain and simple, talking in English about what's really key, what the drivers are, the lessons learned, and how we can make both more accessible to those that perhaps feel a bit intimidated by the topics. So when I go into schools, I often do, I'm asked to do some inset or talk about digital strategy. You won't be surprised to hear that there tends to be 2 different sets of voices that come to the fore. In one side, we get people talking about this is a great opportunity, it's exciting, it's innovative, it gives us this great potential for us to move things forward in our school. And at the same time, we also get rightly educators, support staff, leaders sometimes in the schools feeling that the concept of digital and strategy is daunting and confusing and something that they're not particularly comfortable with. And in truth, we'd be shocked if that wasn't the case. In any topic we discuss within our organizations, there will be those that have confidence and those that don't. And as you'll see, one of the things I think is most key is not always the technology, but actually how we deliver it, how we build that confidence and professional development around it. So, where do we start? Well, my view is that actually sometimes you have to back in order to move forwards. And I play on the strength of all educators and people working in education is that we often are the strongest when it comes to reflective practice, understanding what's worked well. What have we actually got right now? Have we reviewed the technology and the way that we use it? What's become sustained and, more importantly, embedded? We can kind of start to mitigate that first question of, did we just buy that stuff because it was shiny, it was cool, and it was the fashion point? Or is it something that's really being used on a regular basis within our schools? Once we've got a sense of that, what's actually working with impact and purpose already, we can also take that view of looking back, well, where do our collective skills lie? There's often that narrative, rightly so, that no two schools are the same. And we don't mean that just in the physical space, but it's both the cohort of teachers and support staff, as well as the students, that dictate where we are on our digital journey and what's reasonable in terms of the next steps as part of our strategy. But more importantly, if we take that view of getting a grip on what we've already got, what IT devices have we got? Where are they? What software do we use? What subscriptions do we have? What's our infrastructure like? That thing that often gets forgotten by those other than your good selves in the EduGeek world. We've got to make sure that we allocate consideration, time, and quite often budget to building those foundations so that we have the capacity and scale for moving forwards. And so I'd always argue that the more we know about what we have, and sometimes the stuff we've got that doesn't work so well, the better confidence and the more convincing case we can have to actually ask for more of something or to start to move our digital challenge and conversation forward. What's the most important thing that comes out time and time and time again? Well, fundamentally, anything we do when it's a project of any nature, but very much so when we think about the role of digital, is that we need to, as Vanilla Ice would say, we need to stop, collaborate, and listen. It rarely is effective if we create a strategy, whether we want to call it a digital vision, a digital strategy, a digital plan, or frankly, just interweave it into our broader school or multi-academy trust strategic plan. It's very rare that we can be successful with a project if people don't feel they've had a voice, don't understand a purpose, and don't understand the how we intend to deliver it. So I'm always a fan of a Venn diagram. It's nice and bright, but I've tried to use this as a really a kind of a guide of where we need to focus our voices. And you, I hope, won't be shocked to hear that at the heart of that conversation is our teachers and our students, and sometimes parents, depending on the cohort, thinking about the way that technology could support or enable some of the pinch points in our classroom, whether it's engaging with some of our disengaged learners, whether it's about closing the feedback loop quicker, whether it's about allowing greater collaboration, access to resources that they currently don't have. The list kind of goes on. And then feeding into that, you'll see we have our senior leadership team and the school development plan. There will be naturally priorities of areas for development in our school that our senior leadership will want to look where technology can help mitigate or start to deliver improvement. There'll be your good selves, network manager, the IT team, who will be wanting to be absolutely at the table for all the conversations to understand the expectations, the objectives, and provide that advice and guidance on the implications, whether we have the capacity to scale, the flexibility, and so on. Probably overlapping on your good selves will be that role of data privacy, considering as we continue to expand the ecosystem of solutions and tools that we use in our schools and where we store our data, that now more than ever we need to be really mindful of that data privacy. And probably one of the frustrations often for IT managers is making sure that all staff understand the implications and that that check, that DPIA that's undertaken is not to be awkward or dismissive, but it's to ensure that we're keeping that data protection at its heart. Then we want engagement from our Senko and others to make sure when we're looking at technology, we can also be mindful of thinking about accessibility, tools that will hopefully be accessible and of value to the broadest subset of our student cohort as possible. Something close to my heart, we think about getting the DSL involved and safeguarding. The more we put technology in the palms of our students' hands, the more we look at solutions that are online or encourage our learners to go online to research and resource, the more we have the obligation to make sure we've got the right technology and processes in place to safeguard and protect our learners. Then we have the voice of trustees and governors, depending on whether you're an LA school or a multi-academy trust, or in multi-academy trust terms, potentially you want the voice of both, which is about that critical friend, that question and challenge. So we want to move the dial forward. Potentially we want to spend money. If we want to invest, how do we understand the purpose? And more importantly, how do we intend to measure impact? And then we also have finance. And you'll notice I didn't put finance at the front or dominant in the conversation. I've always argued that finance should dictate the speed of the journey, not the direction. And that often I see in schools in growth process, the finance manager has too much of a steer on that direction of travel with technology without considering the voices of those other stakeholders around the table. And then last but not least, training and CPD. It probably should be a circle around the whole chart, frankly. But the CPD is really key, not just for an hour or two at the start of each academic year, but needs to be focused on the C, the continuous professional development. And often schools forget. We get new resources, we train up our staff, we forget about our IT team, support staff, and magically we adopt all these new solutions. And overnight, we expect our IT team to be experts on all of those products, to be able to provide advice, support, nurture, and guidance. So making sure that our professional development extends across all of the cohort who will have a role in making sure we can get the most out of the technology is key. And that too comes a cost, whether it's cost for cover, to free up time for training and the right support, or whether it's cost in terms of external support to have that structured process for training. But time and time again over the last 30 years, we've seen technology projects that have been high profile, that have been deemed a failure, where the failure wasn't actually the technology, it was people's lack of understanding about how it was going to be used and lack of confidence in how to use it effectively. So tying those two together for me is absolutely key. Not to be a message that's close to your heart, but it's really about focusing on priorities over conveniences, and that making sure that when we're looking in the classroom, we're thinking about pedagogy focused solutions that are aligned with the school development plan, that we're realistic with capacity. Sometimes our aspirations exceed our capacity and we need to be realistic. We need to value the solutions that have evidence of sustainability, because that's the key to good effective use of funds. And as those people that we don't like to mention, the Ofsted people, would like to remind us, it's got to be backed up with impact and more impact. Or as Ofsted would probably say, intention, implementation, and impact. But you get the gist. It's a big unlocker in confidence. And when we think from an educational perspective, we often think about the stages of teacher confidence. And I can assign with that. If someone asks me to come along and do a presentation in a school, and I walk into a classroom with unknown students, with unknown technology, and nothing but a memory stick with me, my level of confidence that everything's going to perform exactly as I want will be fairly low. And the same applies if we start a new academic year and surprise, there's a cart full of iPads or Chromebooks or Windows laptops. All devices for me, I'm agnostic, carry equal value in different settings. A teacher's first concern will be, will these 30 devices fire up? Will I be able to manage the student interaction, get them on point, get them on task? So it becomes survival mode. And sometimes that litmus test is, if you're coming and someone's going to come and do a lesson observation, would you put the technology back in the cart and revert back to where you feel most comfortable? Or do we make sure that we provide the right support and CPD, the right understanding of how to use the tool effectively? And in doing so, we move from survival mode to mastery, where we actually have confidence in using something regularly. And like anything, that muscle memory builds, we have confidence, things become second nature. And then as we start to do more and we start to adapt with the way we use our technology, we move to impact. And ultimately, that thing that's the holy grail in anything we do in education, which is how we use technology to spark and encourage innovation. And all those stages for me fit very nicely into our aspirations when we start to build the CPD plan around our digital strategy. I won't go into all the details here. I share this bit of research from Education Alliance Finland. There's lots of drivers, lots of levers that impact on teacher motivation to use EdTech. you won't be surprised, making sure they've got the right resources, having the right time allocated for it. There will be drivers on personal preferences, particularly if you've got teachers joining from other schools or mats. Time to reflect on those kind of incentives. What's in it for me? How's this going to benefit my life? And when we think that broader lens of educational technology, we're not just thinking about, will this immediately have a direct impact on our learners? We're also thinking about that bigger picture of, can we close the feedback loop? Can we reduce staff workload? Can we make things more efficient? So all of those from the research show that the drivers to make that critical investment actually have purpose and impact. For somebody who likes to speak a lot, and I'm sorry, but I'm very much of the view that the litmus test for a scientist listening in, but the real litmus test for effective delivery of any change is linked to communication. And I think the last 2 years, pandemic really emphasized the need for effective communication. And it starts with leadership to staff, why we're doing a project, why we've got a strategy, how we intend to do it, and how we intend to measure the success of it. But it goes beyond that, and technology plays a key role in how we can develop the staff to staff communication. Whether you're a Teams school trust or whether you're using Google, whatever your preference, we'll all know that for many, the tools we suddenly became familiar with and use much more frequently that allowed groups collaboration across departments, across schools within our MAT, facilitated collaboration that ironically was probably less so when we were in our physical silos pre-pandemic and we didn't have that capacity to share. Many of us thought of Teams as being nothing more than a messenger app. And things have evolved, but we're using technology now to really break down the physical boundaries and build that community in the same way as we're using technology now. And it should be part of your strategic plan about how the school continues to deliver and accelerate its communication, not just to students, but to parents and the broader community. And many have seen that as a huge benefit in terms of greater stakeholder investment. And certainly when we think about our primary learners, the more we can get parents involved as part of that digital journey, understanding the tools they need to use, understanding how parents can support learning at home, and probably most importantly of all, and actually there's no probably, thinking about digital citizenship, how we keep our children safe, setting their expectations for how they conduct themselves at home, online, safely. And there's another benefit, which is thinking about communication in the broader sense of well-being. Now, that can be about fostering better communication, feedback, and support to both staff and learners. Sometimes, well-being can be implemented by using technology to generate less communication, less workload, less pressure on our staff, or tools that can actually help to mitigate some of that. So again, no matter what your platform is, communication is at the heart of building an effective digital strategy. Because anybody who knows me and my love of EdTech will be kind of somewhat surprised when I say EdTech is not the solution. I guess most of you listening in here will absolutely get where I'm coming from. It's not the solution. It's a facilitator. It's the supporter. It's the empowerer of great teaching and learning. And EdTech is always going to be in that role of sitting and underpinning and supporting great innovation and all of the activities we do within our schools. I am a fan, and many will know that I always talk about education and EdTech through a wider lens. And that's really because I think we've been very focused for many years on EdTech being a classroom tool, whereas now we think across our multi-academy trust, the role of technology is in all aspects of what we do. I'll come on to that in a bit. And actually, the more we can be more efficient in the way that we manage our student data, report information, communicate, collaborate, account, finance, and all the other strands, those economies of scale feed into the economic viability and the extra resources we can put in the classroom. But EdTech goes well beyond the classroom. So a vision for a school in the digital world. I'm setting this up for a bit of a here, but first driver when we talk about it, and this is not just Al's opinion. I refer to myself as an edu sponge, which means I'm always assimilating lots of ideas from around the world and views of educators in all sorts of settings. And number one is absolutely that we need to remind ourselves that at the heart of a digital school, it's about pedagogy, it's about experience and about outcomes. But in an ideal world, EdTech would not be the daily discussion, but simply an integral part of the school day. EdTech would be used where it's appropriate, but it wouldn't be forced into every setting. And we see plenty of amazing lessons that don't involve technology at all, where teachers would have confidence to use tools, have confidence to try new tools, and middle leaders are empowered to innovate with technology. We would absolutely have a plan where IT managers are at the heart of all digital discussions. We break down some of that separation, not simply informed of outcomes. And of course, all of our students and staff are taught and encouraged to be confident digital citizens. I would argue that what we saw over the last couple of years was an opportunity. It was something we had no choice in doing, to take risks, to try new tools and solutions. We had to do that in March 2020 to mitigate the fact our learners were no longer going to be in the physical building. But some of those risks meant we suddenly found ourselves using new technology and tools in a way we never imagined. Some of our choices perhaps didn't work out, but that's okay too. The key is that actually taking risks is the first step to accelerating innovation in our schools. I tend to use this, something familiar with teachers, I'm sure, is the SAMR model, those 4 levels from substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. The SAMR model isn't a race to see who can get down to the redefinition, but it's just thinking about at all levels the way that technology becomes part of our teaching and learning experience. So we can think of substitution as simply taking a sheet of paper and replacing it with typing it in a Google Doc or a Word doc. But we could think of augmentation and extending things by thinking of replacing an atlas with a Google map and being able to measure distances and find out information about different points and extend it. And as we get down the line, we think of examples where we've got students in classrooms in the UK chatting with children in Africa, and the conversation is automatically translated between the two of them. And there are opportunities to redefine the way we learn. Perhaps we start thinking about the metaverse, that kind of extension of our XR plans and aspirations, one for the future, perhaps more than for the now, but thinking about the way that we can change the learning experience and really redefine the way that children can be encouraged to be engaged in learning in different ways. For all that being said, I would also say, a shot from somebody who's passionate about EdTech and offers some wonderful solutions, less is more, unless it's chocolate. And that's not to say I'm anti any EdTech solutions. What I am passionate about is making that everybody feels and is able to prioritize on the key tools that are available to them, and that trying to do too many things too quickly often results in poor levels of impact and outcome. So let's talk about that impact word. This little brief there. Is impact, as we often talk about in our schools, is impact simply about student progress and attainment? We often think of that because that's what we're measured on. That's what tends to appear when it comes to our assessments and our league tables and other values. But actually, increasingly now in this broader world, we need to think about some of the other strategic measures that also fit into this. So we need to think about measuring time saving, well-being, productivity, the impact on staff retention, recruitment. There are so many other factors where EdTech in its broadest sense can have a cumulative impact. Maybe we think of it under the banner of economies of scale, but certainly there are aspects that are really key as we move this conversation forward. Next up, something that many teachers look at, and this is not my work, this is from Roy Bell at InTech Group, Roy Bell, but I liked it because it visualized the sense that we often think of technology and EdTech within that classroom sense, but in truth, it's much broader than that. Technology is steeped across all aspects of our schools and what we do. And as members of EduGeek, you can probably look at that list and tell me, Al, there's stuff missing that the team at InTech could add to the mix. What it shows is that interlinked fact that technology sits at all aspects of our organization. So often when we start talking about a digital strategy, we have that co-production, we have those stakeholders together, we identify where there are areas of development, we signpost stuff that we think would be innovative and exciting and stuff we'd like to try. And then when we've got this understanding about making sure we look at the bigger picture, the infrastructure, the way we store our student data, some systems that are really essential but invisible day to day within our schools, we end up at that point of thinking, okay, but how do we go about selecting the right tools, the right solutions? And that for me seems to be where the narrative has really progressed in recent years. It's that evidence-informed use and approach of EdTech. And one is about looking at the anecdotal evidence, the impressions from users' experience over time, things that worked, common sources, looking at your blog posts, testimonials. Of course, you've got the huge benefit in EduGeek of getting other people's opinions in the forums. Descriptive evidence, measures of outcomes over time, thinking about white papers, summaries, particularly about more curriculum-aligned technology. There's the correlational evidence where we've got evaluations running in one class but not in another class, and we can see whether there's been any impact, benefit, depending on the nature of the solution. And there's also that kind of causal evidence where we can look at accurate measures of effectiveness, often linked to research papers and other resources. You'll all be familiar with your go-to places, and as we increase communication once again and the use of groups like us here at EduGeek and looking at our social media and our peer groups that we use, we find lots of sources of potential evidence. But we want to take that evidence a step further to make sure when we're looking at spending our hard-earned cash within our schools, that where possible, we're avoiding the risk of finding that it just wasn't quite what we expected. So within that, one of the things I've tried to share, and again, using my EduSponge, this is something that I've adapted from a great rubric that we've shared from Pickerington Schools District in Ohio. Brian Seymour, great guy you'll often see talking at ISTE in the US. And it's really about looking at that kind of simple guide for schools for how to go about selecting and evidencing their EdTech. And of course, I'm going to zoom in a little bit because that's quite tough to read on one screen, how we can kind of separate those two strands between the technology and the pedagogy. So where I start is saying, let's crack on and start with a first evaluation. So from a curriculum point of view, does the item we're looking at align with our curriculum? Kind of an important question for teachers to be considering. Have we actually done any kind of questionnaire of the content it's going to include and whether it's appropriate? Have we checked we haven't already got resources that do a similar thing? And we'll be shocked how many schools do audits and find that there's curriculum resources that departments are renewing year on year, but actually find they aren't actually using anymore. And do we have an understanding of the instructional purpose? Have we got a plan, what this is actually going to achieve and how it's going to benefit us? Now, in parallel, we might have a conversation, and it may well be your good selves, about does the item effectively work within our current and future devices? We don't want to be locked into a platform. In an ideal world, we want solutions that are platform agnostic, so it doesn't cramp our flexibility to change as platforms and opportunities come along. Does the item effectively work with our current infrastructure? We might be onto the throughput needed for it, the Wi-Fi infrastructure, all sorts of different considerations. Then we'll have that absolutely. Does it agree to our school privacy policy? Where's the data stored? Who has access to it? What's the retention policy? What's the risks associated? And we might be thinking about some time savings, about whether the item can be rostered. Bit of an Americanism, but in essence, are we going to have to set up user accounts and details, or can it automatically be pulled through, whether it's from School Data Sync, Google, ClassLink, Clever, whatever it may be. And if we tick all those boxes, then it's probably worth our while spending a bit of time and digging a bit deeper. So the digging a bit deeper then falls into this path, which is, has the item been vetted by a committee or a group? In other words, have we got a group of teachers together to have a look at it and make sure it's exactly what we want? Has the vendor done a presentation for the product, talk through the features, the benefits, the thought process behind it, hopefully some of the evidence that backs it up? Have some teachers actually tested it out in the classroom? And you won't be shocked to hear that we always would recommend that you have an evaluation to make sure that technology that looks great on a trade show stand also looks great in your classroom with your kit and your infrastructure. And of course, did those teachers that tried it, piloted it, evaluated it, actually believe it was beneficial to learning, or maybe it's a safeguarding solution? Did it actually deliver better visibility of safeguarding concerns, or did it provide better data analysis? Whatever its purpose, what was the feedback? And if we can tick all those boxes along that journey, and I'm sure you'll have plenty of other boxes that you'd like to add in and adapt for your school, then you get to a point where you're much more confident about making a recommendation for purchase. So what I kind of say is, this is a keep it simple, and I don't recommend that you don't consider adding extra bits to it, but actually sometimes reminding people of those stepping stones, the checkpoints along the way, can build confidence when we make recommendations for solutions that there's been a number of voices, eyes and ears looking at the suggestion. Now, of course, being one of my hats, being CEO at NetSupport, I always like to fly the flag about how, from a NetSupport perspective, We are very heavily invested in co-production. We work with all of our solutions, working with educators, IT managers, stakeholders, to make sure what we produce is what the customer needs, not what we think they want. And one of the ways of doing that, again, we'll tick one of those boxes for you, looking at the way that you are looking for evidence about your EdTech, is looking for those independent reports. In this case, Education Alliance Finland will undertake reports both on the pedagogical content, the learning goals and more, that's undertaken by teachers in Finland against their framework. Again, another external validation that a tool does what it's intended to do, but is also accessible and easy to use. Let's imagine on our whistle-stop digital journey, for those of you who are still with me, let's think about it. We've got our intent and our ambitions. We've got a process we think we can use that will help us select the right solutions. And then next up is we need to find out how we're going to take that digital strategy and turn it into reality. And sometimes people say, well, there's this one person, they're going to deliver on our digital strategy. And it's not a bad thing sometimes to have a coordinator, but actually increasingly the evidence from schools is where digital strategies, digital visions, whatever label you want to use, are most effective, are where you can break it down into strands and have different stakeholders accountable and responsible for those different areas. Now, this is feedback from Trust, but it compares very similarly to who share those resources. We start with our innovating learning. We have our student digital skills. We have our teacher skills, the technology and infrastructure, effective communication, and last but absolutely not least, everybody's well-being. And those strands feed in. So a few very simple slides, just to cover looking at the use of ICT across the trust, looking at making sure we've got the appropriate technology for the appropriate setting. Sometimes that's kind of a SWOT analysis of which devices work best. Reviewing what apps we use, the inclusivity and accessibility of our technology, looking at how we adopt and capture both our live streaming versus our asynchronous work, and looking at that clarity on remote teaching and learning. So all the strands about getting that sense of what we've got, what tech's available to us, understanding the needs we want to start to be the catalyst for innovating our learning. Once we've done that, the next up, not surprisingly, is about developing our students' digital skills. Sometimes I hear people talking about the digital natives, kids that have been brought up with technology since birth. But in reality, we typically find in a school that just because children are confident with technology doesn't mean they're confident with the technology we're going to be using for teaching and learning. Doesn't mean they're confident with the tools and understanding about how to keep themselves safe online. So undertaking regular student digital skills surveys is key. Developing their confidence with the core apps that we're going to be using for teaching and learning. Building regular CPD for them and for the younger learners, for their parents, is really important. Interweaving more about digital citizenship, and of course making sure we're focused on accessibility for all. And if we start thinking about some of the narrative that we see at the moment, whether it's ChatGPT, the role of AI in education, what we actually focus in on is our students' digital skills are about effective questioning skills, how they can frame and shape the right question to generate the right information that will support their teaching and learning. Gasp, shock, horror, alongside developing our students' digital skills, we also want to develop our teacher skills. Again, doing those regular surveys and check-ins, developing CPD based around their feedback, identifying things like monthly tech clubs, teach meets that we do within our trust, developing online resources. We're great at sharing resources for our learners, but building that central cohort of resources for our staff. Reviewing the use of technology within the classroom, making sure that we don't put that onus on staff to have their own kit at home, and then thinking on digital skills, how we're actually going to measure, how we're going to measure whether that dial has actually shifted. And that often comes to having that open conversation where staff can feel comfortable saying, actually, I'm not comfortable. I don't feel confident using this tool. Point me in the direction of somebody who can support me on that journey. Something that'll be familiar to all of you, and in truth, I'm probably talking to an audience that know more about this and have more worldly experience than I do, but understanding the importance of that technology, that infrastructure, making sure we think about standardization. There's some economies of scale across our trust, but also thinking in recent terms. We're all aware of the white paper, expectations for schools and trusts to be growing in terms of capacity, actually that does have a knock-on effect in looking at the technology we use in our trusts and making sure that it has the potential to be scalable and connectable with new schools joining online. Looking at our data protection policies, evaluating the flexibility of the tools we use, reviewing our disaster recovery plans, our capacity, and a constant check and balance backwards and forwards with a digital strategy group, making sure that we're focusing on understanding at the front of the curve what ideas and plans may be coming along from the communication. I mentioned it a few times, so we're on the home straight, and you're not surprised to hear I'm mentioning it again. It's really important that we develop that communication across the trust, establish staff-only Teams channels, promote supportive dialogue, not just curriculum dialogue, make sure we have a strand focused about how we can build and develop parental engagements and confidence with the use of our tools, develop that school-to-home comms, and also that broader community communication, and make sure we find ways of delivering that communication across our school or MAT more effectively. And as you kind of see at these strands, it may be different senior leaders or middle leaders who are best equipped to the mission. And as I mentioned, everybody's well-being. I think it's really important that we have that as a pillar in our digital strategy. Technology can be used to support well-being, whether it's fostering staff comms, whether it's looking at tools to reduce teacher workload, whether it's assessment tracking, auto grading, audio notes rather than written notes for quick feedback, reflecting on how we can use some of those recordings to build up our staff confidence, impact on well-being, better support for our SEND learners and how technology can support them with their confidence. That's really key to well-being, particularly if we can maintain that routine, irrespective of whether a child is or isn't in school. Easier access to online resources, thinking about digital signage around our schools and making sure that that digital signage as a strategic plan isn't just about the calendar events today or the lunch menu, but is also signposting and promoting success and activities and resources that our learners have produced around our school. Sometimes those small things can all feed into being evidence that we're trying to move and recognize the importance of promoting and supporting everybody's well-being. One of the ones that seems to have the most effect, and it's free and it doesn't take time, so woohoo, we'll have a lot of these, is develop champions for different strands and support each other. The number of mats I go to I will meet and they will say there's certain staff that don't have confidence using, maybe it's OneNote or whether it's some other solution. Again, I pick them all on equal merit. And actually there are other people in them trust who are whizzes with the technology. They just don't know where they are and who they are. So actually identifying who are the go-to people as peers within the teaching cohort, as well as from a technical perspective, allows people to build confidence. If they want to try new things, they can go and ask people, have you got any resources? Have you done this before? Where did you learn about it? Who else would you speak to? So actually identifying through your surveys, through your digital planning, who are the champions for each of the different tools and solutions you use across your trust can be a simple and easy way of really building that support and encouraging people to feel more confident giving things a try. Once we move on from that, we're into really the home straight as some top tips. And the top tips, I don't think will be revelations, but sometimes we forget the obvious in favor of getting caught up in all the detail. So within our top tips, absolutely get everybody involved. Number two, don't try and do too much too quickly, particularly because I recognize that often in schools and mats, we come up with some fantastic ideas and we don't really realize how much work is involved from an IT perspective in actually delivering that thing that they just see as a new icon on the desktop. So really being mindful about capacity as part of that planning. Planning for lots of CPD, and when we've done that, plan for more again, because CPD is the key to getting the most out of the technology we adopt, reducing the demands on that system and support, and actually making sure that people build confidence and want to innovate with the technology. Build the confidence, identify ways to measure impact. And that's back to my message of that broader lens. Sometimes the impact will be something measurable in students' progress and attainment. Sometimes it will be a measure in terms of staff well-being, saving time, better engagement with parents, impacting and supporting in terms of staff retention, because we're creating a space where they feel they've got the right tools and the right support to thrive with them. We need to broaden the lens of measures of impact. And hey, did I mention communication is key? I think I did. Although I think on a few of these slides, the communication link between me and your good selves has been a bit sluggish. But nonetheless, we're on the home straight. I mentioned that one of my roles is CEO of NetSupport. I don't ever like to do a sales pitch when I'm talking to people about stuff I'm passionate about, but NetSupport have a range of solutions that cover all aspects. I like to refer to them as the layer of an onion, a bit like Shrek, to support your schools. From that IT management, so that you know what you've got and how well it's being used and effectively, to school-wide communication, to cloud-based classroom instruction and online safety, or desktop-based classroom instruction and safety, as well as early years assessment. We have a tool for everything. And because I always like to try and end with a bit of a smile and an offer, if you want to try it, you can use a code at the moment, and you can sign up and try any of our products for twice the time on twice the devices for free. So an even better way to start to build up your EdTech evidence base. So bear that in mind. It doesn't cost anything to sign up and try something. There's no commitment, but you'll have a couple of months where you can have a play and use them in your environment. I love talking about it. I don't pretend to be I've got a really broad experience of voices and people that have shared with me their experiences. So I created my secret EdTech diary to be a 30-year journey of lessons learned, top tips, questions to ask, things to consider, digital strategy, how planning worked, the tools that work well, the places to go, and lots more, but done in a way that as if we were sat having a cup of coffee in a coffee shop, not trying to bamboozle everybody with the techie speak. So it might be of interest to you. It may well be of interest to teachers who are keen to get involved but scared or stuck on that first step of how to move and get more comfortable using EdTech. And as always, it's a pleasure chatting with everybody. There'll hopefully be a chance for at the end of this. You can always get hold of me. My social media handles are there, @Kingsley_edu, on LinkedIn, Kingsley1. You can find me at NetSupport. You can find me through a message on EduGeek. And I'm always happy to get in touch and chat about your particular experiences and ideas. And on that basis, let's bring Chris back into the room so he can tell me I was on mute the whole way through.
Hi, Al, thank you. That was a very informative talk, and you only got a bit laggy a couple of times, thankfully.
Hallelujah.
We don't have any questions as such, but we do have a couple of requests from Derek Leggett. He would like a copy of the digital strategy image if at all possible, and we did have an ask for the slides if they could be made possible at all.
I am happy to send a PDF of the slide deck through to you, Chris, and you can share it as part of a link to the notes. More than happy to share that. And obviously you'll be aware there is a free digital strategy guide. It's about 70 pages that I co-authored with Mark Anderson that you can get free from the NetSupport website. It's just chuck in your email address, click on a link, and you can have access to the full guide. It's version 3, lots of ideas and resources in there. And again, another one just to hopefully help discussion and sharing.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I don't think we've got any real questions. I think this is one of those subjects that people have got to digest as well. There's a lot in there. And I'm pretty sure that people will think later on about, oh, I should have asked that actually. But yeah, it was very informative. Thank you.
That's my pleasure. And please do, if anyone watches this post-event, if you want to reach out, if you want me to try and with other people or any resources I've got, I can share with you. I'm always happy to. It's all part of that community vibe at EduGeek. So yeah, always happy to do that. Oh, look, we've got a question popped up from on there.
Ditto.
What do you see as the most impactful?
I'll let you go.
That's a good question. I was actually speaking at an event. I'm not sounding like I'm bragging at all. It's an online event with the GUESS group across the Middle East. 2 days ago, I was chairing a panel and we were talking about EdTech now, what's had to be embedded, and future EdTech. And it's a big question. I mean, one thing is crystal ball gazing. So none of this is guaranteed, but we can see a trajectory. So one thing we can absolutely see is the effective role of EdTech in terms of data and how we can more effectively use data and developing. So I think data is top of the list in terms of more effective use. We can see the narrative and conversation when it comes to chat, the role of AI, it's in personalized learning, whether it's learning in the role, which questioning and outcomes, there's a whole heap of things there that we're talking with that. I'm just going to
I think we've got quite a bit of a stutter on with you though.
One in reality, Chris, that concept of data rather than sharing of information. So we're seeing lots of that in our schools as being a real kind of future landscape. Maybe the metaverse, you know, we've had VR, we've had AR for a while. In many cases, it's not been heavily embedded as yet in terms of showing educational impact. Good for experiential, but maybe the metaverse with the right management of content and appropriateness for young learners will be another area. But I look often at the international schools that are independent, largely because they're funded differently, so they've got more money. They tend to be ahead of the curve. And if you look at what they're trying to do, they're trying to use data more effectively to inform outcomes. And they're looking at the way that AI can support personalized learning pathways and close that loop in terms of teacher feedback and intelligence.
Okay, we've got John Benson there, has asked, you talked about CPD for teaching staff. Any advice on how to fit it in with their busy workloads?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We often talk about great ideas to add, and the analogy often shared is think of something before you can pour something else in. And there's no easy fix, is there? Because at the end of the day, the time and the clock is finite. So some of the things are about, if we look at tech that can free up time, the auto marking, feedback on rubrics, supporting and facilitating ways that staff could quickly create feedback audibly rather than written on their notes. If we look at the way that digital tools can be used to reduce down the pressures on parents' evenings and that can be done remotely, we start to maybe shave a few bits of time. The second bit is how do we make that CPD accessible? Often challenges, rather than people having to sit through long training courses and guides, is creating that bite-sized resources that empower them to get into technology quickly and easily. So I think the kind of the exemplars, the short type training is much more impactful. Fundamentally, the number one thing is sharing, signposting resources, because we often spend most of our time when it comes to learning trying to find the right things that are useful for us. So that's really important. And then longer term budget planning for schools is actually part of that CPD budget should be about providing cost of cover so that staff can step away and be involved in using during their school time, more time for actually that development. And that's why planning groups, having work streams, those pillars as part of your digital strategy means during the school day, when there's cover provided, you can get staff to be involved and develop their skills without it being something they've always got to do in the evening or weekends. I'd love to think there's a better answer, John, but the reality is we're really limited when it comes to time in our schools, and I certainly don't claim to have the magic wand to fix that one.
And one last one from David Hicks. Are there any tools that can walk users through that evaluation process for looking at IT resources?
That's a good question. I mean, there are quite a few rubrics, and I call mine, a rubric. Maybe others will give a different label. There are different flowcharts that you can use. I mean, there are some providers that offer good step-by-step guides. I can't think of one immediately in mind. I'd maintain that the best community is the community you're involved in. I personally think when we think about the role and many of the members here from EduGeek, we've got technical people who understand the implications of technology on the infrastructure, the risks and so on. We're often in many ways very able to create the rubric from our own perspective. What we need to do is help support the rubric from a pedagogy and a teaching perspective to signpost the things that we want to make sure that our teachers are looking at. And at the end of the day, our teachers will help signpost our understanding about the ease of use and the training needs of the technology they want. So maybe, again, I'm happy to take mine and set yourself a task of 5 extra boxes that you think apply for us. Share it on the EduGeek community and and then you can refine depending on where you are, confidence levels yourselves with the use of technology.
Okay, I think that's it for questions now. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and you, Al, especially for conducting today's first webinar.